Awesome. So it's 5 o'clock and we'll get started. Hi, I'm Anna Marquise, Civic Engagement Coordinator, and welcome to the People's Review Live, hosted by us, the Equality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization working to improve the lives of all Wyoming's people through transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. The People's Review Live is designed to help people across Wyoming engage with our government and keep up with important issues and debates. When we work together, we can ensure transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. And that's never been more important than it is right now. I'd like to hand things over to Jen Simon, ESPC's Senior Policy Advisor, to give us a quick overview of housekeeping and introduce today's panelists.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Thanks to everybody who's joining us. And on behalf of our whole ESPC team and our coalition members, welcome. We're excited to have this conversation. A couple of housekeeping points before we get going. Even though we are well into the Zoom era, we just want to make sure that you know everyone in our audience is automatically muted as part of the webinar. We'll post resources in the chat. We would love for you to post your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. If you have any tech issues, like if you can see me but not hear me, or if you can hear me but not see me, or any of the panelists, you want to let your host know that's Anna. Chat her up directly in that chat feature. And now we will move on to perhaps our most timely People's Review Live to date, because we're talking about transparency in state government, talking about the upcoming legislative session in the midst of a global pandemic. We'll be talking in a hot second about the latest memo from the Legislative Services Office about what the session might look like. And we want to start out with a reminder that you can get involved with state government. You can get involved with the upcoming meeting of Management Council. It's Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Anna's going to drop the link to listen into that meeting in the chat, and they will be discussing the 2021 general session. So that'll be available for you. And we're excited that we have these transparency experts here to talk with us about how to ensure public participation so that all of us, everybody listening, everybody in the public, everybody across Wyoming can really participate more fully in our state's democracy. So I'm really excited to get to introduce our four panelists and get into some questions. Senator Tara Nethercott is one of Wyoming's top 40 lawyers under 40. She has a proven record of success in both state and federal courts, and is a partner of Woodhouse Roden Nethercott LLC, which I believe is one of the few female partnered firms in the state. And prior to joining the firm, she was at UW College of Law, served as student body president, won the school's moot court competition. In 2016, she was elected to the Wyoming Legislature for Senate District 4. She just was reelected in 2020 after she ran unopposed. Congratulations, Senator. She is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, one of only 2 women currently chair. She's also on the Corporations and Elections Committee and the Management Audit Committee. Welcome, Senator Nethercott. Thank you for joining us. Shannon Anderson returned to her hometown of Sheridan to work as a staff attorney at the Powder River Basin Resource Council in October 2007. Since then, she's provided strategic, legal, and organizing support to address the impacts of coal mining and power plants on people and places in Wyoming. She also works on other energy issues, including oil and gas, renewable energy, and she's a graduate of Grinnell College. She has a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School and a certificate in environmental and natural resource law from Lewis and Clark. Welcome, Shannon. Thanks for joining us. Marguerite Herman is a lobbyist for the League of Women Voters of Wyoming. She's advocated on state, local, and national levels in Wyoming for several other groups, including the PTA, the American Cancer Society, and Advocates for School Trust Lands. She has an educational and professional background in education and journalism and serves as a trustee for Laramie County School District No. 1. She is the author of the most recent edition of Wyoming League of Women Voters Look at Wyoming's Government and presents a Legislature 101 program. Welcome, Marguerite. Thanks for joining another panel of ours. And Darcie Hoffland is the executive director of the Wyoming Press Association. She started out her career in newspapers with the Laramie Boomerang after graduating from the University of Wyoming. And as the director of the WPA, Darcie works to promote the general welfare of the newspaper publishing profession and guarantees freedom of the press in Wyoming. She also helps to lobby for transparent government in our state on behalf of WPA. So welcome to all four of you. Really excited to have you and really excited to get to talk about this right now. So really quickly, we were just chatting before we came online. It turns out that not everybody is aware that LSO has a memo out suggesting that the legislative sessions start on May 3rd instead of January 12th. So before we get to the very first question, I just want to share my screen and show everybody where they can go to look for this information. So if you'll indulge me for just a second, let's see if I can do this without incident. So here we go. This is, can everybody see my screen, hopefully? This is the state of Wyoming's legislative page. Upcoming committee meetings is where you want to click. And then you want to scroll down to, if I can find it, Management Council on the 24th. And of course, I can't actually reach the button that I need to push right now. So here we go, details. Under meeting materials, there is an explanation of the logistics and considerations. There is a suggestion for a 22-day session, a 27-day session, and a 32-day session. So this is the memo that we have started to talk about, and we will circle back to, that talks about safety and precautions. So I'm gonna take us back out of here and go back to just a basic conversation. But hopefully that'll help you find the information that you need and also bring everybody up to speed about what's being proposed. So to kick us off, if you don't mind, Senator Nethercott, would you talk a little bit about what a session would normally entail? When would it usually start? What are you obligated to do in person? And what kind of conversations have been going on around the pandemic?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction. So the legislature has been obviously very busy responding to the pandemic, responding to our community concerns. And as most of the audience knows, and these participants here today, we have been still conducting our interim meetings via Zoom process, and still the work of the legislature continues remotely. As most of you recall, we did in fact call a special session in May of this year where we responded to the need to appropriate so much of that CARES Act funding. Since that time, the legislature has had on top of its mind what the future of the pandemic holds for Wyoming. I think as most of us have experienced, and most of the globe has also experienced, this is a very dynamic situation. And so the ability really to meaningfully plan is pretty limited as a result of the ever-changing and dynamic circumstances that we're faced with. I think we were all surprised at the level of spike that we just experienced and are currently experiencing that happened in October. And that has happened globally, regardless of us going back to school and becoming maybe more lackadaisical in our mask wearing and social distancing. I think that spike still surprised most stakeholders across the globe. And so, you know, the legislature certainly thought that we would be fortunate enough that if we remained somewhat stable, as we had been throughout the summer, that we probably could meet live for our traditional session, which starts about the second week in January, where we are required to meet at the Capitol in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and gavel in with a quorum with both the Senate and the House. That is our only requirement. However, this is a normal session. So there's a budget session and then a full session, and that is about 60 days, but we're only really in for 40 business days. There have been a number of conversations about whether or not we should obviously still hold that live. And as a result of the spike in October, kind of the urgency or desire to do that or think that that could be pragmatically handled has been lessened. There are still some folks obviously that think that that's something we should do and can do with appropriate precautions. There are others that think we should just hold off entirely until spring or until much later, until the vaccine is disseminated. And there are those that think a hybrid is possible. And probably what I anticipate happening, and of course, anything can happen, and I don't have the inside scoop of any final decisions because those have not been made, but likely a hybrid type situation will occur we'll come live, we'll gavel in, particularly those legislators that live here near the Capitol. So those Laramie County folks, and Albany County and Goshen County, that it's easy to get to the Capitol, and we'll establish that quorum and do our constitutional obligation of appearing annually, and then probably convert to a more remote platform after we do that, and maybe handle some of those more urgent issues that need to be addressed, and even some of the easier lifting. So some of those committee bills that aren't as controversial, and just kind of getting some of the work done that needs to get done, that would be appropriate for a Zoom session. Hopefully we can probably do that for a reasonable period of time. I think, as all of us know across the state, that Zoom is and this remote technology is remarkable and has allowed us to continue to work like we have, and what an amazing technology. But to do a full session, I don't think is wise on Zoom, and probably not healthy for us either. So I do think, I'm an advocate for potentially that hybrid option of trying to do with both, and then meeting again live later in the year once that vaccine is disseminated and hopefully we have recovered from some of these spikes.
I appreciate that feedback and that insight. And I think that you referenced something that is an important question that, Shannon, I'd love to turn to you to talk about. You talked, Senator Nethercott, about the fact that we've done some of this work in the interim process via Zoom, right? The Hollywood Square screen for everyone. Shannon, would you talk a little bit about what interim committees are usually like, and how things have changed in the global pandemic, and how the public can engage in this process, especially via Zoom?
Yeah, so normally during the interim session, which is the session between sessions, when committees really do the bulk of their bill work going into the session, those meetings are live in person. They vary from location to location across the state. They're traveling meetings, so they typically go to areas of the state where maybe there's a bill that has an impact on that area, where people and local stakeholders would be most interested in attending. So that's normally how it is, but this past interim, all the meetings have been remote. The last few have had some in-person ability in Cheyenne or potentially other locations, but most of us have still been participating over the Zoom platform. One of the challenges is you have to sign up in advance of the meeting to say that you want to testify. And sometimes you don't know really if you want to testify or not. So I think the committee's been getting more people signed up than they probably actually have show up, which makes it a little bit of a shuffling challenge for the chairs. And then, of course, in our state, it's also dependent on your rural broadband access, your internet capability. I'm lucky to live in town, and my Wi-Fi router is right there. And so this, service is good, but even some of my colleagues on staff don't have that. And a lot of our organizational members are family farmers and ranchers in rural communities. And it's been a challenge for them to be able to follow along and participate. One of the good things about the Zoom is that it does allow for the YouTube component as well. And so anybody, even if you're not participating in a legislative committee, you can watch along on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel for the legislature, and those meetings are archived. You can watch them at your leisure over dinner or wherever you feel that you want to watch them. But it's been good, I think, actually, to have that archive, because sometimes when you're in it, you don't hear the right discussion, or you don't hear some of the things that you maybe should have picked up, and so you can always go back and listen again. But it's been, it's interesting. Some of the committees, I think, have had lower participation than normal because of the remoteness. Some of them have had a lot more participation because you're allowed to get people from all over the state to be able to Zoom into a committee where normally you would have a 5 or 6 hour drive to get to that meeting.
Well, I was just going to go to you anyway, Marguerite. So go, please.
Well, just what Shannon says is absolutely true. But shall we cast our minds back just 2 or 3 years when nobody, every interim committee meeting was in person, and that was it. And then at the behest of a lot of us public, interest groups, there was some recording, some streaming, but not much. It was very spotty, and it depended on local, the connectivity, which, as you know, around the state goes from good to abysmal. But well, it was a start. And so now, with warp speed, so to speak, we're into this, which again, it requires you have the connectivity and the equipment, but is accessible to everyone. And so life has changed very radically in that way over. Again, with those caveats about being connected and having to sign up ahead of time, which kind of what squelches the spontaneous comment. But by the same token, when a committee met in Lovell, I mean, there was most people, if you didn't have a budget for travel and food, you didn't go at all and you didn't hear it all. And so when the session came around, it was all news to you, and the major work had been done and things were set in their ways. And so ultimately this is better, even with all the warts, I would have to say. One thing, and I guess I would, since we have a legislator here on the panel, I noticed that sometimes that but in Zoom, there are a lot of back channel conversations going on, texting and that sort of thing that that the public you watch, but you don't really see, and you don't hear everything going on, which you can if you were in the room. And I find that a little bit disconcerting, I guess. Although on occasion I've heard a committee member speak up, said, "Well, I just received 3 texts about." So there's this like third channel out there with a lot of chatter going on that the public doesn't know about, doesn't hear, doesn't see. And so it's a little unnerving, but I guess it's just part of the give and take of that process. But anyway, just want to remind people that it wasn't so long ago that unless you got in your car and you drove 12 hours and couldn't find anywhere to stay or to eat, some of these remote meetings were not accessible at all. And it was all news to you when January came along. So as bad as incomplete as this is, it's still much better, I think. So just,
I do agree, Marguerite, with the geography of the state. Having a technology like this makes it so that lots more people can participate, even when broadband's not great. And I will say I'm a person who listens to all of the audio when the session is in. It would be nice if we still had that audio option as well, but we'll take what we can get. And Senator Nethercott, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to the side conversations via text, which I think maybe happen anyway,
maybe so.
even in real life. You don't have to. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
No, thank you for the opportunity to address that, because I do think it's important to recognize that this is legislating in the modern age. And it's been interesting too, as a younger legislator, hearing some of the concerns about that from some of those members who are from, the older generation that serve in the legislature. There's been attempts to ban cell phones, which is humorous, because these are tools, right? I mean, my cell phone is just as capable as my laptop. And so if I need to access information, which I need to access information to make decisions, right, then we want to have those tools at our fingertips. So in the same way that it provides us ability to participate in public meetings, it also allows legislators information. So there are those conversations occurring, but just as if we were in the chamber or sitting next to each other, we would be having some of those same just kind of cordial conversations that occur, or funny commentary sometimes, because these are real people sitting for 10 hours in a meeting. And over time, our legislators are our friends and our colleagues. And so, you have normal kind of communications with them in these meetings. We also have our emails open, and that's the same during session. And so anyone can email us at any given time, which of course, the difference between a text and an email is, there isn't one really. It's a written communication that can be received either way. So I don't think the public would feel great about us not having access to our emails or any other communication opportunities just because we're sitting in a meeting. So I know it can somewhat seem disconcerting, but generally it's in an effort really to provide timely information or just communications with colleagues.
I have a question for Senator Nethercott, if I could, just real briefly.
I'm going to cut you off in a second, Marguerite, because I got to ask Darcie something. No, go
Well,
ahead.
Just very, very quick. So emails on the topic of legislation, which I know is sort of a fuzzy definition, that is a public record, as is it not that is a document? Emails are not public record?
No, legislative emails are not public records.
Okay, I thought, okay.
And
Sorry.
so this is exactly where I was going to go with Darcie, because for a couple of reasons. One is because if I'm not mistaken, for other elected officials, they are public records. So if I emailed my mayor, well, I don't live in town, so I don't know why I said that. If I emailed my county commissioner, that at their county commission account, I believe that's a matter of public record, but the legislature is subject to different sunshine laws. Is that
School
correct?
board, yes. Yep.
And I'm going to go to Darcie for that, because I feel like the Wyoming Press Association and papers and local journalists are the ones who usually are interfacing with the state legislature and also their local electeds around issues like this. Is that a fair point, Darcie? Will you correct us for our mistakes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's correct. You know, as I understand it, it was a number of years ago that a bill was passed that exempted the legislature from a lot of the Public Records Act that other entities are held to. I think from what I've been told is that at the time the governor vetoed the bill, but the legislature overrode the veto. So they are exempt from a lot of those public records that you see other entities you know, are held to.
And I'm talking. While we're on that subject, last week in corporations, there was a bill, and Senator Nethercott's on corporations. There was a bill that came up that discussed, let's see, would make it so that local government would no longer publish certain information in the paper of record. Would you talk a little bit, Darcie, about what implications that has for transparency? And then we'll go to Senator Nethercott.
Sure. So that bill, basically what it does is it eliminates the publication requirement of salaries and minutes for cities, counties, and school districts. That was previously a public notice in newspapers. And then it requires that information be made available for search on government websites. You know, regarding the implications, I guess when it comes to government accountability, we believe that there's this sanitizing effect that notices published by an independent third party has. Also, you know, we're concerned that, you know, because people really aren't visiting government websites regularly to read, and that, you know, there's this, you know, expectation to see information in newsprint, less people are going to be able to discover the information, which is, you know, really the purpose of giving public notice. And we really think that that might hinder, you know, the ability for the public to participate in governmental decision making. And that's really going to hinge on adequate and proper public notice. You know, we really believe in government transparency and feel that that's the third leg of the sunshine laws, along with open meetings and the public records law.
Thank you. And I know you testified on that, so appreciate you talking about it a little bit here. And if I'm not mistaken, that bill advanced for support in the committee. Would you talk about that a little bit, Senator Nethercott? I know that there was quite a bit of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a particular note is that all of the laws associated with what should be published are still required to be published. There's just the elimination of required publication costs associated with the local newspaper. And so that's now transferred to the entity's website or the state's website for government information. And really the purpose for this is cost savings. We heard testimony from a number of the smaller communities that some of these costs really do comprise a percentage of their budgets in order to be forced to publish to the local newspaper. And it isn't that the legislature doesn't support the local newspapers or doesn't see the value and doesn't disagree that the media isn't the fourth arm of government and really is what keeps America, one of the greatest countries in the world, from keeping that sunshine there, of reducing corruption and increasing transparency. But the situation isn't working in today's modern age in a way that I think is meaningful, particularly for our rural communities. And so, the pushback on the need to have that information published, well, certainly the newspapers can publish that information if that's what their readers would like to consume. That information is made available to them and they can access that information and they can publish that information to their readers. Just the requirement for the government to pay for it to a particular private corporation is eliminated. And so in some ways, I think that's important too, that we are not forcing certain government taxpayer dollars to go to one particular private corporation. So there's kind of a flip to that uniquely in the state of Wyoming, where we don't have a lot of diverse media sources.
I could actually spend the whole rest of the hour talking about this, but I'm just going to quickly give Darcie a chance to respond before I want to punch a question over to Shannon about that same corporations committee meeting.
I guess I would respond in regards to the cost. We really believe in government transparency and think that it's more important than government efficiencies, and that the cost to have that transparency is very minimal. We reached out to all our newspapers to send us their financials regarding what they billed out for public notice to city and county officials. And it was an overall look for public notice. So it included all costs, not just salaries or minutes, and not just what was required statutorily. And then we looked into the overall fiscal budgets for those entities, and it was less than 0.5%. And there are costs to us. We have people who are employed to take care of those notices, to make sure that they're adherent to the law, to make sure that they're laid out, that they're, receiving the proper attention, and that they're working with those entities to make sure that those public notices are properly done. We provide notarized affidavit. There's quite a bit that goes into it as far as printing and distributing that information. We also have that information posted to several online sites. So there's a lot that goes into it as far as our cost goes, and feel that it would be unfair to ask for that information that for hundreds of years across many, I think all of the states, is required to be put in newspapers, because it is that third entity verification and accountability. I think that it was President Reagan who said, trust but verify. And so, we've been stewards of that job and those public notices, and making sure that there is that, watchdog and stewardship over public notices. And there's a cost for us to do that job like any other independent contractor. So we think it would be unfair to ask us to, especially when our staffs are, the staff of our newspapers can be limited when we're looking at reporting other information to the public, to have to go out and search on government websites and make sure that those websites are accurate and timely and following statute and getting that out. We think that the current system has been working for a long time, and we think that people, expect to see those notices in newspapers. If they're moved to just government websites, we think that maybe the people, it'll be out of sight, out of mind, and don't think that the people will know to go there on a regular basis to get notice, not just the record.
Well, and thank you, Darcie. I'm gonna just say that I think and I'm guessing that Senator Nethercott probably has a response to that as well. I have some thoughts. I don't mean to cut off this conversation, but because I do want to move on, but I do think that there are obviously real implications of trying to balance where the information is, how we make sure that it is accessible. And there are already a number of questions in the chat about it. I would love to, I'm not sure the best thing to do, and I don't want to cut you off either, Senator Nethercott, but I've got questions for everybody. Would it be all right with all of you if we continued on? Okay. And we're clearly going to have to come back to it because it's in the chat all over the place. What I wanted to ask Shannon, as we were talking about corporations, is that last week in corporations, there was a net metering bill. And what I really want to use it for is a conversation about the process, about how bills get developed, what the public can see, how we participate with them. And if you talk a little bit about that, and then Senator Nethercott, again, you're on that committee, you were part of that process. I'd love a little bit of back and forth about what that looks like and how it unfolds.
Yeah, sure. So bills have to be posted before an interim committee meeting, actually before any committee meeting, including during session. And that allows the public to know what the bill is and to be able to show up to that committee meeting and to be able to comment on that bill. So that happened for corporations. There was a bill related to, it's a topic called net metering, which is essentially the payment system and the rates that are set for something like rooftop solar or backyard wind, so customer generated energy. And so there was a bill that was posted before this committee meeting that had some implications for that. Over 70 people had signed up to testify for this bill because they were very interested in it. And there was a lot of work kind of behind the scenes from organizations like ours to get people engaged and excited about testifying about this bill because of the negative implications it would have. Then people showed up, and it ended up that there was another bill that was sort of already drafted by some members of the committee to substitute it out. And I have to say, so one of the things of a committee that should be is to be responsive to public comment and opposition. And that's sort of what happened at corporations. There was a proposal that was very controversial. People opposed it. And there was a group of legislators who came up with something else, thinking that it would help assuage that public opposition. But unfortunately, in that process, it just made it more difficult for the public to engage. People didn't know what they were commenting on. It was, on the fly legislating, which can happen, but it's difficult for the public to kind of be able to engage. And so that was, the concern of that committee was there was a new bill that kind of got thrown in with some language that nobody had a time to digest or understand and to be able to comment on. It was the last committee meeting for this particular committee. So the next opportunity will be in session to be able to engage on the bill. I trust that there will be lots of people that will still be very interested in this bill, even in its current form, just given the topic and how much people care about the opportunity for rooftop solar in the state. So it's not the end of the story, but it's a new beginning potentially for this version of the bill.
Well, and I appreciate that. And what I want to remind people before we go to Senator Nethercott is that the legislature, the Wyoming legislature, is a citizen legislature. Everybody in the legislature has another job. This is not their full-time job. They are not paid a salary. They get a per diem. They, are doing this work on behalf of all of us. And so, we had an interesting moment before we got on where we were talking about something and it hadn't necessarily been circulated to all of the legislators. It happened to be filed under another committee. And so I feel like what I'd also love I'd love direct comment on corporations if you'd like, Senator Nethercott, but also sort of the complexities of how all of this works from the perspective of a legislator, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my comments were pretty, direct at the committee meeting. For those that participated, I was very disappointed in the process, and disappointed in my colleagues for, I think, violating fundamental principles of fairness associated with lawmaking that are inherent in our system of laws in this country. I believe it happened as a result of fatigue. We had a 3-day meeting, which is also very unusual. We had a 3-day meeting because, quite frankly, we shouldn't have heard the 2 bills that we were hearing on the 3rd day. Those 2 topics were added last minute at the 2nd meeting. And so I objected to that as well, that we weren't that process was inappropriate and we shouldn't be addressing those topics at our last meeting. And so what happens is we have to add an additional day to our normal meeting cycle. So we're 3 days on Zoom on 2 very complex and very difficult bills, where I believe people had already made their minds up and wanted to be done, and forgot their role as representatives of the people's house, that we are here for the people. And so when we have 74 members of the public giving comment, that should signal something to all of us that this is important, whether or not it might persuade our vote, but this comment means something. And so then to layer on the impropriety of a bill draft, which wasn't a bill draft, which was some writings made around the table by a senator to try to solve the problem in the last minute, was just in violation of the complete process. I mean, it shouldn't have happened, and I am sorry that it did. It should not have become a committee bill under that process. A committee bill means it's been worked and it has the full committee support, and we actually know what the bill says. I cannot tell you what that bill says with certainty. I know what Senator Case wrote, and I, of course, asked him to screen share that for the public and for us to be able to at least read it for momentarily. But that was a hijacking of the legislative process, and should not have happened. And there's the candor. And I think some of that has to do with 2 concepts associated with due process in our laws, right? There's substantive due process, making sure we get the right results, and then there's procedural due process. Both of them are equally important. And in this case, kind of that process was not respected, and thus we have the situation that we do. And it really doesn't have to do with the merits of the ideas or the concepts. It has to do with the significance and importance of that process. So very disappointing. Concerning the second question regarding the complexities of lawmaking, it's not supposed to be. I mean, you can get your little how to write a bill little booklet, right? And we have little guides for grade school kids that come to visit the Capitol for what that process looks like. When the process is not respected and those rules are not followed, it can become complex. And so, there is a process involved. It is not complex. You just have to kind of understand it by following the rules and then move it through. But it is fast. It's very fast. And there's a lot of subtle things that take place that may be hard for a member of the public who's appearing for the first time at a committee meeting to kind of keep up and catch all of the actions that are taking place. So that can be difficult.
Yeah, I frequently get emails from our members, 3 days later, well, what's going on with this bill? And I'll tell them it's already dead, or, something happened. I think it is really hard for the public to follow along with the fast and furious Wyoming legislature. At least, the interim committees are supposed to be spread out a little bit more and have more of that methodical time, I think, between the meetings, which is helpful. But during session, it does get very fast and furious.
There's no question about that. And certainly, as I'm looking at the at the proposed 22, 27, 30-day schedules. 22 does not sound good for exactly the reason that you talked about. Things have to move so incredibly quickly. Marguerite, I was going to turn to you and just ask sort of a general question about, you know, all that we're talking about in terms of transparency and why it matters, and why it matters as a component of people participating in democracy. I know from your work at the League of Women Voters, you're really passionate about making sure people turn out to participate, to vote. What's the role of transparency in that?
Well, let me just mention one that I've been following the legislature for 40 years now, and I've seen everything in terms of that. But and even under the best of intentions, to be efficient and that sort of thing, is that inviting the public in and making them aware of every step in the process sometimes can be very troublesome and involves a lot of extra noticing and that sort of thing that I'm not excusing it, but sometimes it's a matter of just trying to get the job done. Like, for instance, one of the proposals for the upcoming session is having mirror bills. So because it's efficient, although you could argue that it's not, but that's the intent, is that it's efficient. But it becomes, from before difficult, becomes impossible for, unless you are part of a lobbying team that has 3 or 4 people, you cannot possibly be aware of everything going on, all the amendments, writing amendments and that sort of thing. And so, and the public, if you're not on the ground with the legislating body, there's no way you can keep track of a piece of legislation with mirror bills. So, and so I get, you know, the league, we're going to speak against it if indeed they're going to let people like us comment on whether they should do that route, because it's sort of like what Senator Nethercott said, there's a process, and that thing's where you go committee, floor debate, 3 votes, and then another committee. I mean, it takes up a lot of time, and Lord knows the House can debate something to its death, as we all know. And as maddening as that is, it's the process, and it's thorough, and it gives the public a chance at every stage to participate. Like Shannon said, sometimes people come up and say, so when is that going to be heard? You say, you know, it died last month. And so you know, if you're not there, it's hard to keep track. So so the mirror bill thing, again, an attempt to be efficient, and I think the bill, the net metering bill, an attempt to use these last few minutes of in a interim, best of intentions, but it short-circuited the process. And as difficult as it is to watch something when you're there in person, if you're not familiar with the process, it becomes just impossible to keep up with it. But
well, and Marguerite, I appreciate you bringing up mirror bills. They were actually, that was the next card, but you're just way ahead of me. But what I think is extraordinary about it that I kind of want to touch on a little bit right now, and Senator Nethercott, I think you're in the midst of everything, because what I'm thinking back to is the first time I saw them do the mirror bill process was during special session, which we talked about. But the thing that we saw that I don't think I've ever seen watching the legislature before was the joint conference committees afterwards, right? To actually reconcile the differences in those bills. And I believe Senator Nethercott, you and Representative Connolly had to hold a pretty contentious committee together. And that was, for me, something that I had never seen before, and something that I really hope we can figure out how to continue regardless of how the session plays out, because I don't think that joint conference committees are noticed in the same way. Anyway, would you talk about that process just a little bit from a transparency standpoint and your experience?
Sure. So those joint conferences occur at the very end of a session, and it is when things really are fast and furious. And that's where one body of the legislature, so either the Senate or the House, does not agree with what the other body did on the bill draft that already went through the Senate, the one chamber. And so there's a disagreement. They support the bill, but there's a disagreement as to some of the changes that one body did. I think theoretically they're supposed to be noticed, but it's happening so fast that I don't think that happens in the way that it should, and nor can it. as a result of all of the changes that take place. I've been on many joint conferences. Sometimes I don't even know that I am, and that's not uncommon either. And so you just get grabbed by someone who's in charge, and you go find a room to go sit down and talk with the other members of the other chamber. And that's just what it looks like. And you try to just work through it. And sometimes you get results and sometimes you don't, but it isn't the timing of the process doesn't really allow for it to be, excuse me, to be public in that way. And it really does require some pretty intense negotiating with your colleagues. It's where you can really see the personalities and understand when people get stubborn or when they're willing to compromise. And so it's pretty fast and furious.
Yeah, and Jen, I would just add too, it depends on the chair of the conference committee whether public comment is even allowed at that conference committee. So it's not typical that someone from the public is even able to participate. Sometimes if they have a question for like agency staff or something like that, then there's an engagement. But the public doesn't often engage in that process. So really you are just, even if you know where the room is, you just show up and you're a spectator. So it was interesting to see it during the joint special session because it was on Zoom. And so we were sort of there, but and I will say too, on the mirror bill, the Oxy land buy bill was a mirror bill this past session. It was one of the first I had seen where it was a bill that was not a budget bill that was done through the mirror bill process. And it was interesting to watch how that was done and how one version of the bill died and one kept going. And but it was, as Marguerite said, I think it was meant to be more efficient and ended up not being very efficient, that process.
If I could just add one more thing about the conference committee process is that in the bad old days in the Capitol, I don't know, I mean, I hate to sound like, this ancient sage, but the nooks and the crannies and the places where those committees could meet, that even if you knew the time and the day, you couldn't find them anyway. So at least this process, I mean, there weren't that many places to hide in the Jonah building. So that was sort of, that was good. But also being on Zoom, yes, there is really no opportunity for the public unless you've done your lobbying and buttonholing before the fact. I found it kind of refreshing to be able to, there was more notice and more availability now than, maybe necessity made it happen. Maybe it wasn't good intent, but I think it is better now in that process. But it's so opaque to the public because it's so wonky and inside the beltway. But there it's at least it's getting marginally accessible now. And and the committee conference committee reports are online, and you can get those. And so it's as good as I've ever seen it. I know that's cold comfort, but it's about as good as I've ever seen it.
Well, I appreciate all of that. And I want to start to wrap us up by thinking about a couple of things. First, Darcie, if you'd make really quick comment, and then I'll turn to you, Shannon, about what role newspapers and journalists can play in transparency. And Shannon, I'd love for you to think about and comment on the same thing from an advocacy and a nonprofit standpoint. And I'm going to hold everybody to tight time now because I have one more question after each of you go.
Thanks, Jen. I mean, I guess when it comes to newspapers, government accountability is, one of those top priority lists for us, and keeping the taxpayers informed is a part of our duty. It's one of our most critical roles as free press to act as a watchdog for government. Excuse me. Local newspaper reporters, we play in my opinion, an indispensable role in communicating information and engaging on the behalf of the public. And as much as news and information and the way we get it is changing, I think that there's this fundamental bond between newspaper journalists in our communities. We're not just nameless, faceless reporters. And actually, I think that the importance of, what we do has actually grown. I think that when local journalism declines, so does government transparency and that civic engagement.
Well, and I appreciate that drawing of the parallel in terms of how they work together. And Shannon, your thoughts from your perspective working for a nonprofit advocacy organization?
Yeah, so it probably wouldn't surprise most people that there are lots of corporate lobbyists involved in the legislative process. Different companies have people on staff or government relations folks, and then there's a whole suite of lobbyists that are professional lobbyists that get hired by companies to lobby on their behalf. So organizations like ours really do serve the public. We have a whole constituency of Wyoming people that we try and keep informed about the legislative process, let them know what bills of interest are going through, and really to be their eyes and ears at the Capitol to help them engage in this process that is fast and furious and sort of opaque to most of Wyoming. So we're sort of the conduit for our members, and then working with other nonprofit groups through ESPC and other collaborative roundtables, we're able to kind of think about not only the issues that we care about, but social justice and other issues that our members may be interested in. Right now, of course, with tax reform and the Wyoming budget, everything the legislature is doing reaches every single one of us. And it is really important that we all engage in the process. We know what's going on, your schools, your hospitals, just everything about Wyoming right now is being touched by the legislative process. So. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I would love to close out with Marguerite and Senator Nethercott. How can members of the public, people who are participating and listening tonight, how can they take action? How can they get involved? How can they participate in this whole process? Marguerite, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, hats off to the Legislative Service Office, who have been working diligently for years to get their website usable, friendly, complete. And at the beginning of this meeting, Jen showed you how to, and actually it was kind of a nice little way of how to get into the meeting information, how to find documents and everything. And so I would just say there's a ton of information on the day-to-day progress of the legislature, on these committee meetings, on information. And I would just tell people that if you can become facile with that website, and especially during the sessions, and they update their calendars every few minutes, it is a powerful tool to stay up with things, to find the amendments, what's coming up, maybe take some action to cut stuff off at the pass, keep track of calendars. So I know it sounds very kind of bookish, but it's true that if the website is very powerful. It's not real intuitive, but it's getting better, and that's one way. The other way, I think, is to find a lobbyist or an organization that you are simpatico with, and if they have someone on the ground there, find out when their opportunities are. When is this bill coming up? When do I have a chance to be part of the process? So if you can't be there in person, find someone who is, and the legislators now, I think they all read their email now, because it wasn't so until very recently. So I think if you write an email, there are ways to write it and then text. I think mail is unusual enough that they'll reread it. So you can reach out to legislators. I think they read your messages. And if you're Joe Q Public, not a lobbyist, you can weight it times 10 what we do. So if you're a member of the public, please get in touch with your legislators, or really any of them. But finding out when and how, sometimes it's an inside game. Talk to any of us lobbyists, we'll help you out.
I love that. Thank you, Marguerite. And Senator Nethercott, will you bring us home? How should members of the public get involved?
Run for office. You start there, you'll be directly involved. We do need more people running for office all the time. Marguerite gave some really spot on advice, which is to use the resources that are at your fingertips that in the comfort of your own home, where you feel confident and comfortable in accessing information and kind of just understanding what the issues are, so you feel prepared to speak with a legislator or to make your ask and understand where the process may be, is, I think, really helpful. The other piece of great advice that she provided, which I think is the most impactful, is find a friend who is active with any elected body that you would like to access, because they can give you really the inside track on how to access that particular either elected official or elected body, and walk you through that process. And that's really the fastest way. But I would just step back and push back that this is Wyoming, right? And forgive me, I'm going to say it. We're just a small town with the long streets. I know, but it's true, right? So I live in a neighborhood in Cheyenne, right? And I walk the streets and I have a business and I'm at the local coffee shops and I participate in my local community events. And your members of the legislature are not dissimilar to myself, and they're in our community. So really, you can just call me and we'll go to coffee, right? Or I'll make a meeting with you, come to my office, we'll sit down and talk about issues. We are really, really accessible. So the legislative process is a little bit more frightening than just talking to your legislator. We shop at the same grocery store. We're going to the same places. We're filling our vehicles up with gas just like you are. And so we have chosen to run for office to make time for our constituents and to serve the public. And this is a priority for us. And we really feel valued when we have that opportunity to meet with folks face to face and remember why we're doing what we're doing and doing those long 12-hour days on Zoom, right? So we really do appreciate it. And don't be afraid just to contact us for that type of a communication.
Thank you so much. I love closing out with a reminder that it really is a small state, and that our citizen legislature, for whatever flaws there may be with the website or the process, I think we're all incredibly well-intentioned about how we want Wyoming to be. I've loved this conversation. Thank you all so much. My apologies to the people in the chat. You did get some good answers from Senator Nethercott and Shannon Anderson. Thank you to the panelists for taking on extra duty and answering questions. Whatever we missed, we will follow up with folks in our follow-up email and make sure that we have those resources. What I would say again before I turn it over to Anna to take us home is that please, there are still committee meetings. You can get up tomorrow morning at 8:30 and tune into revenue. The state is in fiscal difficulty, and they'll be talking about some possible solutions. So that is a great place to start. You can tune in, they'll be there all day. And we would encourage you to tune in on Tuesday morning to Management Council, where they'll be talking about what the session will look like. That's an important conversation. You can sign up to comment between now and 5 p.m. on Monday the 23rd. Again, we'll put that information in our follow-up email. But hopefully these folks have opened your eyes in terms of what happens, how it works, and how you can get involved, because every single person being involved is really what makes the whole process work. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and Anna, thanks for hosting us tonight.
Thanks everyone for joining the People's Review Live. The Equality State Policy Center is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit organization. That means that we rely on charitable gifts to fund all of our work. Donations can be made on the web at equalitystate.org or by mailing a check to 419 South 5th Street, Laramie, Wyoming 82070. If you'd like to help sponsor the series, let us know. If you'd like to sign up for the newsletter, action alerts, or make a donation, just use the web address in the chat. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next People's Review Live, where we'll be tackling more great topics. And remember, get involved and stay involved. Tune into Revenue Committee tomorrow to hear discussion about Wyoming's deficit and possible tax remedies. Watch Management Council on Tuesday morning to hear them discuss the upcoming session, and track what's happening with Wyoming's budget in December by listening to the Appropriations Committee. Questions? We've got you covered. Our job is to make Wyoming's government more accessible to all Wyomingites. And we'll see you back here next month for another People's Review Live.